Okay, we're live. So just so you know. All right, here we go. We're at the, just give me a second. We were organized. Good afternoon and welcome to the March 2nd special meeting of council. The city of Parksville recognizes the people of the Coast Salish nations and their traditional territory upon which we gather with gratitude. I need an approval for the agenda, so a mover and a seconder, if I could, for the agenda. Councillor Wilson and a seconder, Councillor O'Brien. All those in favor? Carried. Thank you. Just got a brief statement and some quick business before we get into the budget, if you don't mind. I think we've all seen the images of the hardships coming up with Ukraine, and we're all saddened and disturbed by the aggressive Russian invasion into the Ukraine. Many of us are feeling helpless as to what we can do, and I'm proposing that council approve a resolution today, which I believe will represent our residents who are feeling the same way. I know I always preach about staying in our own lane, but I think this one is so important that it needs a special saying. We stand in support and in solidarity with the people of Ukraine. The invasion by Russia is illegal and unwarranted, and we wish to support the Ukrainian families living here in Parksville and our region who have ties to the Ukraine. This resolution that I'm about to bring up will be provided to St.Mary, the Protectress Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and along with a letter will show the city's support of their Candlelight Vigil to be held on March the 4th, which all of the council members are invited to, by the way. The lights on the Parksville Civics and Technology Center will remain blue and yellow in a show of support through March as long as it is necessary. I don't know if anybody's had a chance. I know Adam and I have seen and Teresa has seen the lights. It looks absolutely amazing. A copy of this letter and resolution will be sent to the Prime Minister of Canada, Premier of British Columbia, Gord Johns, the MP, Adam Walker, the MLA, the Union of BC Municipalities, and my phone is ringing. Sorry. And the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. So that's how I feel. I want to put this on the floor for a vote. In fact, we're going to have two votes. One of them is that the vote that waives the idea of notice of motion. And then secondly, the resolution. I'll read the resolution first because that's important, and then you can vote whether you want to waive it or not. So whereas the Federation of Russia has invaded the country of Ukraine, an unjustified attack on their people, and whereas Canada and many other countries are standing behind Ukraine and providing support, the city of Parksville wishes to show its support of the strictest sanctions possible on Russia by the government of Canada, and whereas the city of Parksville will send a letter of support to St. Mary's, the Protectress Ukrainian Church, and the Parksville Civic and Technology Center will be lit in colors of Ukraine for as long as necessary. So that's the resolution that I'm putting on the floor. But first I have to ask for indulgences from the council. Is there anybody in objection to going without a notice of motion? It has to be unanimous. So if everybody's in favor of it, then we can go directly to the motion. I need a seconder for it. Are you seconding it? Thank you very much for that. Any discussion? Councillor Frass?
Thank you. I think what you're bringing forward is definitely worthy of it, having discussions. I didn't know that we were going to have this conversation here today, so I wasn't really prepared to have my thoughts together on weighing in on it. But one thing I'll say that is if we're going to be providing a letter of any kind, I think it needs to be a letter that is supporting a message of peace and non-conflict, because this isn't an issue that I'm particularly educated on as to the history or the issue that's going on there, aside from what I see in the news. And I'm not the type to pick a side in an argument that I'm not involved with and not educated on. So, generally I get a sentiment that I agree with what you're saying, but as far as saying that we implore them to have sanctions in place against a particular side, or that we are picking a side, it's not the message that I think we should be sending. I think it should be that, especially as a peacekeeping country, that we stand for non-conflict, that we stand for peace, and resolution to that effect, where we're looking at a lesser degree of lives being lost. That's inevitable in this type of a war. So that's my stance personally. I think it needs to be that as the focus rather than picking a sides and having sanctions, because as you mentioned, that's not really what we're here to do in this role. And if we're going to have support, it should be one for world peace.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson and Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I hear Councillor Fraz's sentiments, but I think that we could add the peace part in there. That would be fine for me, but I agree with the sanctions. I think that it does need to be a very strong statement. And so I would be in favor of leaving the sanctions in the way the letter is worded, the resolution is worded, and I might add peace in there if world peace, that makes sense as well.
Thank you. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. I fully support your motion at this time. I believe it's important for us, the city of Parksville, as small as we are, to show our support to the government of Canada with their choice of proceeding with sanctions against Russia in this particular case. The sanctions are done in a economic way and not in a force way. It's by no means partaking in any conflict other than affecting them economically, which is the best way we can support our Ukraine friends on the other side of the world, as well as the Ukraine families living here in our area. It's an unjust invasion, as you have mentioned, and we need to let the people of the Ukraine know that we are fully back behind them and doing whatever we can, which is the government of Canada's decided sanctions are the way to go. Then I feel it's important that we support that. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Worship, and thank you for the resolution coming forward. Like many others around the table, it's troubling. I spent most of the morning actually looking back on history, and it's interesting and it's troubling at the same time. So although we are absolutely supporting the Ukraine people, I'd also like to just put my 2 cents in for the sanctions and the non-conflict, because there's so many Russian people as well that are not in support of this, and you can see that as well. So again, I appreciate the motion and moving forward and adding a peaceful sentence to the motion as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it needs to be pointed out here that what we're saying basically is that we're in full support of the strictest sanctions. We're not saying that anything else about that. We're not talking about any type of providing of munitions or any kind of war materials. All we're talking about is that we're providing that we think that it's a good idea for sanctions. I think that's a better alternative. And to Councillor Fraz's point, it's probably a more peaceful way of doing this than going in there with troops at this point in time. I think it's actually quite a good way to approach it. That's my feeling. I think we have to show support to the Ukrainian residents, not just in Parksville, but right across the country. It's interesting. They said that Ukraine has more nationals in Canada than any place else outside of Europe. I thought that was pretty impressive. So anyways, any other discussion, any other comments? Councillor Fraz? Yeah,
I just want to make it clear that for me, without the letter removing the part about sanctions, because I see it as an aggravation of and continuation of war, just recognizing that who the sanctions are being placed against can often be vindictive type of personality as well, that I think it just perpetuates that. So unless the message was clearly focused around world peace and removing of the sanctions part, I can't support a message that perpetuates the war. I agree with the supporting Ukrainians and world peace. And if the message was focused on that portion only, then I would support it, but I won't put my support behind sanctions.
You have the option of asking for an amendment if you wish.
Then I'd put forward that amendment that to provide a letter of support and focus on world peace, but to remove mention of any sanctions towards any individuals or countries.
Okay, if that's your amendment, I need a seconder for that. Councillor Chandler, discussion? Councillor Chandler?
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, through yourself to the rest of the councillors. I like the discussion around the whole table. We all have our 360 view on this, and the reason I want to propose the support of Councillor Fraz's amendment, friendly amendment, is I think that he's correct in that way, and we're all correct in all our ways the way we look at it. In this particular case, I can't disagree. I think that sometimes putting sanctions and creating a bit more of an aggressive stance in the way we word a letter and so on can be a problem for other people that are involved in the conflict. We've got a lot of Russian citizens that aren't in charge of what's happening here. We've got a bit of a tyrannical leader that is obviously pulling the strings here, and he's been doing it for years. But again, without knowing the whole story, I don't want to fully comment on it. But at the same token, I think that I'd like to see it directed towards more peaceful rhetoric rather than sending a stern warning. I don't think that does anybody any good.
Any other comments? Councillor Wilson, did you have your hand up? Sorry.
I did.
Okay.
Thank you, Worship. So I'm afraid I still believe that we should honor what the government is putting forth. I believe that the resolution is worded well. I don't mind adding in peace, but and I think as far as Russians who live here and who don't support that, that's all well and fine. I have read that there was a student at UBC who's, without any money from his family back home in Russia. I'm sure there are many, many others. And UBC and our government is not going to let them just, hang on their own. I don't think anyone's out to hurt the Russian people or any of the foreign nationals here, but I do think that we have a point to make, and that is to support what our federal government has put forth. So I support the resolution, and if the amendment is to add peace in there, I will accept that, but I won't take out the sanctions. Thank you.
Councillor O'Brien, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I hear what you're saying. Everyone's trying to go for a peaceful settlement, but I really truly believe the sanctions are the way to get parties at the table to negotiate maybe a peaceful settlement. Otherwise, there is no stick. There's nothing to stop this aggressor in the case of invading Ukraine. Sanctions will peacefully bring some pressure to the aggressor to get to the table and negotiate faithfully with the Ukrainian government. The last negotiations was not faithfully done. It was just a ruse. But now that they're talking about meeting again to try and do negotiations to a peaceful settlement. Part of that peaceful settlement is because the Russian people, the Russian government have been now advised of the full force of the rest of the world that has putting sanctions in place. And so they have understood that, okay, this is maybe a move that we should maybe negotiate with Ukraine, because obviously the rest of the world is not particularly happy with conflict and they want peace, as we all do. But the thing is that the sanctions are what gets them to the table. Otherwise, it's just a matter of taking over. And then, you want a peaceful settlement. This is far better to try and get this at the table, because the Ukrainian people now, they're laying down on the bridges and on the roads, and They're fighting for their country. They're fighting for their freedom. And the thing is that I know that here in Canada, we would be doing exactly the same thing. So the thing is that if we can have sanctions as a tool to try and get to a peaceful settlement, I think that that is a very important tool to exhaust before any conflict with violence is brought into the picture. So I think it's an important tool in the toolbox should be used. So I would favor leaving sanctions as part of the letter.
Fair enough. I'm going to speak and then Councillor Fraz and then Councillor Chandler, and then we're going to hopefully wrap it up because it's gone on a little bit longer than I even anticipated it would. But I would suggest if you want, and I've heard it from several councillors here, let me just suggest some verbiage. If Parksville wishes to show its full support of the strictest sanctions possible to achieve a peaceful settlement in this situation. I think if we put that there, because that's really what it's trying to achieve, isn't it? Is a peaceful, I'd be willing to put that change in there anytime to achieve the peaceful settlement. But having said that, it was peaceful before the Russians moved their tanks in and started to take over. So, this has been something that has been antagonized, and I believe that it's something that has to be stopped. And if this is the only way we can stop it, then this is the best way possible, rather than the world bringing their guns in to stop it. So that's what it is. Councillor Fraz and then Councillor Chandler.
Reason why, for me, the importance of taking out the sanctions part of there is because if we're going to focus on a message, I think it needs to be one that's rooted in what our values are as a peacekeeping country. And I don't think us to dictate what kind of tools that go forward to use in that kind of thing. That is the federal government that decides on that. I think they need to be reminded of our values and principles that we are as a Canadian country. So for me, that is strictly around the peacekeeping. I don't think we should go anywhere off that message since we're sending a letter of support there. I don't think it needs to be all encompassing. I think, again, just needs to remind them of what the values are of Canadians. It's not correct that it's been peaceful there for a long time. They've had wars going back a decade. It's, you look back at their history even to 2020 when they have the Alley of Angels for all the children that are happening there in the same cities that they're fighting in right now. It's not a nice situation at all. So for me, the importance, and I strongly stand by it, has to be focused on what our values are. And to me, that's only the mentioning of the peace, and how it gets achieved is not for us to decide.
Okay, we're still talking on the amendment here. So Councillor Chandler.
Thank you, Worship. Yeah, just to clarify too, I support sanctions. I absolutely do in certain ways, in many ways. I guess what I'm, my jumping on board with seconding the motion for Councillor Fraz is to create some conversation, number one. I think that's important for us to talk about that possibility. I would still support your amendment, your one with the changed verbiage. And the reason I would support that is I think that it still sends the right message that as long as we start to tone down the dialect a little bit and just try to tone down the conversation, I think that's going to be better than everybody shouting over the same fence back and forth for 3-4 days, 5 days a month. That doesn't lead to anything. But getting them at the table, as Councillor O'Brien says, that is a way to get people to discuss things. And so I fully appreciate where you changed yours, and I would support that now.
Just a point of clarification, mine's not on the table only because we already have an amendment on the original motion. So we'll go from there. We have to either approve or defeat, and then we can bring that as another amendment after.
Sure. Just as a follow-up, I was just commenting that I like the verbiage that you put in there as a change. That's all.
Thank
you.
Thank you. All right, going to call a vote on the amendment. So the amendment is, as Councillor Fraz has proposed. I will call the vote. All those in favor of the amendment? Opposed? It's defeated. Now we're back to the original amendment. And I'd be more than willing to propose the amendment to add it in there, sanctions possible to achieve a peaceful settlement would be seconded by, it's the initial motion is by Councillor Patterson. She's making that. Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion reading it that way? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. All right. And as I said, I did mention that everybody's invited on the 4th by the church to go to the. Now, finally, Mrs. Holmes, I'm so sorry for taking so long of your time, but this is a very important thing to all of us.
Absolutely,
you.
no worries at all. Okay, this is our first budget meeting, and we will have 2 other budget meetings later in the month, in addition to your 2 regular meetings. So today we're going to review just a bit of the financial planning process, some economic overview, a little bit state of the union, kind of looking at where we're at in inflation and assessments and things like that, and then bringing forward some spending packages that would be related to new items for consideration to go into the financial plan. So the first step is really some dates for you to keep in mind. Today, we're going to have our first meeting, and then March 23rd, and somehow the March 30th one has dropped off the screen, but there's another meeting on March the 30th, where we'll be looking at all of our operating expenditures, both for the general fund as well as our utility funds, the sewer and water, and looking at the capital for all of those funds. So as well as at your March 7th and 21st regular meetings, there will be things coming forward to you that will be related to budget, and we'll be looking for your consideration of those items. So what I would say is that March is all about information coming to you, and then we'll bring it all together for you to assess priorities, must-haves, and where we might need to make cuts, or things that you want to bring forward that should be in the budget that you're not seeing. So when we move into April and May is when it all comes together in a financial plan bylaw, as well as the tax rates bylaw that flows from that financial plan bylaw. Both of those need to be approved legislatively by May 15th. So obviously we're working towards that goal. As well in there, we'll have consideration of sewer and water rate changes if needed based on what the financial plan shows us as to costs and things like that. So that's what we're looking at. We're going to be spending lots of time together over the next couple months, and this is just kind of the framework right now, and we can add meetings in April as needed if we do for further consideration of the financial plan.
Mrs. Holmes, I'm just looking at my schedule here online, and I don't show them March 30th even on the computer. So.
Oh, 6 o'clock. Yeah.
No.
You have it in yours?
Somebody have it? I'm looking at mine right here.
We're having 2 evening meetings.
6 o'clock.
The 23rd and 30th.
I'm sorry, I quit looking at 5. So
Yeah, no worries.
yeah,
Those
my
2
apologies, it's there.
Yeah, those 2 did go to evening meetings.
All right,
Yeah,
that's perfectly fine as long as
Okay.
it's there.
sure.
I can live with it. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. And Jetta, just to get confirmation. So today, we're just pretty well receiving information. So we're not actually debating at all. We have questions if we have, but we're not actually debating or deciding or anything at that point.
I think
Is-
that's up to you.
Oh.
Yeah, you could debate and even make motions if you felt
Oh.
strongly that something should. We're not necessarily looking for that, though.
Okay,
It'll be all about providing you with information, but certainly debate and provide feedback and motions as you see fit.
fair enough.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, just in terms of a general overview of the financial planning process, there's obviously a lot of inputs. So in addition to all of this information that we provide you in a formal way, it all comes from a number of different inputs, things like what's the inflation? What is the assessment and population numbers? What are our QP collective agreements looking like? What employees are we needing? There's RCMP and fire considerations. The state of our infrastructure, and councils put a lot of efforts towards that with respect to asset management and looking at some things around our infrastructure. There's various funding opportunities, and we'll talk about some of those today. And then just our overall financial position. Our audit starts in a couple of weeks, so we'll be providing some feedback to you on that as that audit finishes up as to where our accumulated surpluses and reserves are at. And we can bring you forward some kind of preliminary amounts in that way. And a lot of what comes to you is recommendations from staff. And although this is your financial plan and it's a 5-year plan, staff brings you analysis, information, and recommendations based on what we see in operations. So starting off with inflation, as you're all likely aware, we're at a high in our inflation rate in Canada that hasn't been seen in 30 years. So that's impactful in many, many ways. Obviously, in terms of some different cost increases that we're seeing. There's, as we just discussed, some instability in the world, and there's inflationary impacts that in some ways are beyond the management of the Bank of Canada. Typically, they try and manage it within that light gray bar that you can see on the screen, which is in that 1 to 3% with a goal of 2%. Our model that we use for the financial plan really uses that 2% as our inflationary adjustments looking out 5 and 10 and 20 years. When we're seeing inflationary amounts like we are right now, it upsets the model a little bit. So we'll try and provide information to you where costs have been adjusted different than the model to reflect some of those inflationary increases. I know that the Bank of Canada was hoping to bring, I don't think I've heard it today, perhaps an adjustment to
Half a
the
point.
half a point. Okay. So that's going to start perhaps to bring it down, but the instability in Ukraine, I know, is rocking the markets. So I think we're going to continue to see a lot of instability in our pricing, but it's kind of a historic difference for our management of costs and trying to give you very accurate forecasts in the financial plan. And I think our inflation also hits the city and our taxpayers differently. And we see that in some of our cost increases. So when we're looking at inflation, we're thinking about material costs and construction and fuel, but our taxpayers on the other side that are going to be paying the property tax bills are also looking at groceries and housing and other costs that maybe don't impact the city directly, but we need to think about that on the flip side. So we're almost getting hit on both sides with respect to trying to provide a financial plan that is fair in terms of what costs it takes to provide services in the city, but with an awareness of what our taxpayers are facing as well. Just to give you an idea of some of the cost pressures that we're actually seeing on the ground already in our invoices, not just kind of anecdotal information. We're obviously very aware of all the COVID costs that we've seen over the last couple of years. Some of those have become operational in terms of increased cleaning and things like that, but the time frame on that is still uncertain. We're getting some good news now, but we're not sure still where that might go. So there's certainly additional costs within the financial plan that are still directly related to that. Our insurance is something we've seen 2 years in a row in the double-digit increase, and it's very significant. It's reflective of some of the major kind of climate-related emergencies that have happened in the world, risk factors around that. But 2 years in a row, we've seen upwards of 30% increases in our property tax insurance, 10% increases in our liability insurance. So about, $65,000 to $70,000 in each of the last 2 years, just in insurance alone. Fuel, you're all aware of what you're paying at the pump. And again, that Ukraine conflict is going to impact that. And I think even our preliminary estimates on fuel might need to be adjusted going forward now that that is happening. Our construction costs, anecdotally, everyone's talking about it. We're seeing that in our contracts. For example, last year when we were building the outdoor theater and getting quotes on that, you saw the impact on that. It's very, very significant. Some of our materials costs, grass seed and fertilizer ranging from 6 to 30% increases. Paper products, whether that's washrooms or copy paper, 10 to 20% increases. Our chemicals for the water treatment plant, upwards of 8%. So those are real costs that we're seeing that need to be reflected in our financial plan model beyond the 2% that was factored in as kind of an inflationary adjustment. The other significant cost is RCMP. And you're likely all aware there was a significant settlement with respect to the collective agreement for RCMP members last year. That will flow through in a number of ways. The first is that there's a retroactive payment that needs to be made. And fortunately, just with amounts that we had accrued over the last 5 years and just surplus that we had, we're going to be able to finance that retroactive agreement within the 2021 year. So that part is okay, but that settlement increases the cost going forward. So We're actively collecting information from the RCMP. Their year end is March, so they're just now doing their forecast for the next year. But I've had several conversations in the last 24 hours with them, trying to get updated numbers to be as accurate as possible in our estimates, because it is a big number for the city in terms of what we're looking at for RCMP costs. The other factor that in the long-term plan, there's been the addition of a member at the RCMP every 4th year was in the plan. So that's coming up now, where it was initially in 2022, but with council's direction in the 2021 budgeting process, we bumped it out to 2023. So right now in the financial plan that will be coming to you, that 18th member is added in 2023. So you'll see a significant increment in that year related just to that additional member, not related to the change in the cost structure. So we'll provide you with more information about that and analysis around the costs on that as we look at the operating areas. But just to give you a heads up on that, that's another significant cost that we're seeing this year.
Are we going to have to, sorry to interrupt, are we going to have time to have those conversations today? Because I'd certainly like to talk about the 18th member. I'd also like to talk about the 27.5% increase in salaries that we're going to be looking at as well. So I think those are all very, very important.
Yeah, well, we could
numbers.
certainly have those conversations now. I was hoping to have more information to bring to you on that, but we can talk about all of that, including the 18th member at any point, including now. And as we get more information, we can bring that forward. But if you've got direction or want to talk about that further, by all means, now is a good time.
The 18th member is the first part. I mean, I understand, and the public is always saying that we need more police officers, but I think there's something that we've got to take into consideration here. What we're doing is that 18th member is actually a subsidy for the electoral area policing. And if you want to, I'll just give you a quick numbers on it, because I've gone through this umpteen times, is 48% of the population live in Parksville and Qualicum Beach. That means 52% live in the electoral areas. Parksville and Qualicum Beach provide 25 police officers, and the electoral areas that represent 50% of the population provide 13 members on the police force. So they're getting away with about, I don't know what the math is on that, but it's significantly less for, you know, as cost when they have actually more population. And the other part of that, of course, is the fact that when there's a call to Coombs, Arrington, Bowser, wherever in the electoral areas, that takes the police out of the core of Oceanside for a lot longer period of time than back. And in fact, they say that 53% of their on-calls or their calls that they go out to are to the electoral areas. So what we're doing is if we give them the 18th member, if we put the 18th member in, which by the way is at the last go around here in the latter part of last year, it was around $200,000 per member. So that's a 1% tax increase for that police officer. So that is we're going to increase our taxes by 1% to cover off so that we can pay for something that the electoral areas. And I say the electoral areas, I don't want it to be considered that it's the RDN. The RDN has nothing to do with this. It is the province that pays for the electoral area police department. So policing costs. So let's not blame the RDN specifically on that, but it's their areas that are covered by it. That to me is a very important part. So you take that and then you add, right now we're looking at a 2.5% increase just on the numbers that we were given just recently on their collective agreement for their salary increases. So that's 3.5% tax increase just for the RCMP, if we look at it from that perspective. So I think we've got to look at that 18th member and say, look, we shouldn't be putting any more officers on the beat until the electoral areas come to the table or come up with a better solution to how this works. I'm open to all kinds of conversation here. I just don't think we should be subsidizing the outside areas for this. That's my view on it. So go ahead.
Can I just provide two pieces of information that maybe contribute to this conversation? The latest number that I had from RCMP Finance is that in 2022, the number is about 204,000.
Okay.
So that
Yeah,
you're in the
that's-
ballpark. So looking out, we're probably even higher than that once we add inflationary adjustments.
27% pay increase.
So with respect to what was the settlement, which I think was close to 25%, I understand from my early discussions with them is that they factored in some of that in the amounts we've been paying over the last 5 years. So the actual bump in this year is about 16% that we're going to see from 2022 to 2023, rather than that higher amount, because they had factored in some increases along the way. And that's what I'm trying to nail down is what, and reconcile that. I want to review our records back for the last 5 years, just to make sure that jives with the amounts
Understand.
that they're saying. So that's about what we're looking at, is maybe about a 15 to 16 in their percentage increase this year over prior year.
Okay.
It's still a big number,
Yeah,
yeah.
on $2 million worth of salaries.
like that, yeah.
Okay, so that's $320,000 a year in increased salaries that we're going to have to account for, which in that case then would be 1.5% tax increase for that, plus the 1% if we talk about the 18th member. So we're still at 2.5%
Right.
for the pay increases. Councillor O'Brien, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Your Worship, and I'm not sure of any clarification, perhaps yourself, Your Worship, anyways. The comments were about this adding the one extra member that City of Parksville is going to pay may not necessarily contribute anything extra to our policing security and tasks that happen in Parksville is what I'm hearing. But I'm unsure about the quotation Mayor Main is regarding the RCMP. You were saying for the electoral areas, they do not pay their RCMP, that is paid by the province. Is that-
The RDN does not pay towards it is paid by the province.
So those taxpayers in the RDN electoral districts do not have a addition onto their taxation from the RDN for policing costs?
I've been told that there is a slight amount that's put into their annual tax bill, although nobody's been able to tell me how much it's been or what it's for or how they calculate it. I've asked a couple of times for that. So I'm answering as I'm not 100% sure, but generally the vast majority is paid for by the province of British Columbia.
Well, that's good information. And if that is correct, then I certainly think that at this particular time that we've passed the 18th member, we passed it to 2023, deferred it to 2023. I'm suggesting that maybe we should defer it once again until we get this situation rectified of why we would be paying for the 18th member where it's going to be no benefit to the city of Parksville.
I'm in agreement with that. I think at least 2024. And then by that time, hopefully we've had time to sort through where all the money's coming from for it.
But because to be clear, we have had this conversation with the ministry.
We have.
And we did not, I was at that meeting and we did not receive a response at that time, other than they heard what we were saying. And they heard the numbers, but they didn't suggest any way of making the funding more equitable. So I would certainly think that would be a good move. Thanks.
Your worship, if I could add one more comment, is the whole idea around when we hit the 15,000 population is the other twist in this, which we were going to talk about later on when we talk about population statistics. But your comment about, you might add a member, but the actual service level may not increase. The other piece when we hit 15,000 population is we go from where we currently pay 70% of the cost. It will go to 90% of the
Yes.
cost. It doesn't change the service. We're just at a different payment threshold. And again, that's a very significant bump. It's not based on population forecasts within this 5-year plan, but it's in the next 5-year plan. Like we're looking at probably 2028 that we'll be hitting that 15,000. And again, that'll be a very significant.
It will be at
amount.
the next census because that's where they take their calculation from.
Right.
It's at the census. So, and if we can somehow move a whole bunch of people out of Parksville for that July 1st, 2028, and then move them back in on July the 2nd, then we could get around this. But you're right, and we will be over 15,000. There's no doubt in my mind come 2028.
Right. So I would suggest if council is wanting to actually make that move, that we would like a motion on that so that I could reflect that in the financial plan that I bring to you on the 23rd, rather than discuss it again on the 23rd. You could make a motion now, and then I could
I'll make
reflect that.
motion. I'll make that motion to move it, and second by Councillor O'Brien, or 2024. Then we've got 2 years. We can talk about it at that time. Oh, I guess I gotta call the vote, don't I? I'm sorry. I'm just thinking, oh yeah, that's easy. All those in favor? Opposed? You're in favor. You seconded it. Okay, we can if you want. Does anybody have anything they want to say about it? I'm sorry, I just blew right past that one. Any conversation? All right, then I'll call the vote. All those in favor? Opposed? It's carried. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's all good. Just some oversight on our BC assessment. As you likely have heard, in the Central Island, we had some of the highest increases in the province in the range of 30 to 40%. And Parksville's average was about 34.6%. So we were right in there in terms of increases in assessments. Needless to say, this generated a lot of calls to the city and especially to our finance staff, wondering what was going to be the impact on their property tax notice. And we took the opportunity in those phone calls, as well as in social media and in our city page update, to really explain that sometimes it doesn't mean anything towards your property tax notices. It just changes the distribution of the taxes across. So if your assessment though was higher than the average, you might see your property taxes increase. And if it was lower, you might actually see them drop if there weren't any other changes. So having a significant increase in our assessments like this isn't necessarily a revenue windfall for the city. It often actually can give us some other challenges in terms of housing affordability for our employees. And we have issues with recruitment and retention around that sometimes when we see increases like this. And so it's important to understand what it really means. It'll mean some different numbers on our tax rates to reflect that different proportional sharing. The folio numbers change a little bit, but again, that's reflective of what we're seeing in our building and inspections and in our developments. So the non-market change, which is what is kind of new stock of properties in the city, was about 2.2% of our assessment, which equates to about $84 million. So that will generate new taxes, but it also comes with new costs and new demands for service. So it's not necessarily a revenue positive thing. So we'll be incorporating these numbers into the financial plan model, and just wanted to give some oversight on that as well. With respect to population, again, we've had lots of great information this year to work with, but we did have new census numbers that showed, as we all expected, that Parksville has grown and a new population of 13,642. Interestingly, our model was quite close in terms of our population estimates. It kind of fell right between our 2021 and 2022 numbers. So that was good to see that our modeling works. That amounted to about 275 new residential folios in that time. And the growth rate, you know, they're all numbers. It's not necessarily a linear growth rate. The first couple of years of that 5 might have been slower, and then we see a real peak. So, but roughly that's what we're looking at. Some of the impacts that we're going to see as a result of this in our financial plan is increased activity in planning and building inspections. We know that there's homes being built. Our operations staff, there's additional people in the park and new people on trails, and there's new infrastructure required related to that new development. And then, as we talked about, we're getting closer to that RCMP threshold. So we all had a bit of a sigh of relief that we hadn't hit the 15,000 for this time round, but we know it's coming. So we need to start talking about that.
I think the other, oh, go ahead. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Your Worship. It was just a question about the 275 new residentials. Does that include the apartments, condos, single family, everything? Or how does that work?
Through your worship. Yes, that's all the different types of residential.
Just so you know, just before this meeting, I was in talking to the Director of Planning, and I challenged the Census Canada numbers on the number of residents. They said that we had 6,700 and some odd residents in 2016, and there was 300 more over a period of up until last year, when we know we've issued 997 permits for residential units. So somewhere along the line, we lost 600 houses. So I have a real problem with, and so the director is going to look into those numbers and see where that occurred, because there's 600 houses or 600 residential units at $1,574 per unit in municipal taxes. That's a lot of money to lose. So we need to find that out for sure before we go any further with it.
Yeah, I wonder how much they cross-reference with BC assessment in terms of reasonableness of the numbers,
Well,
right? Because
exactly.
that's from BC assessment in terms of the folio count. So yeah, interesting.
Yeah, but definitely there's significantly more than what they're saying in the number of residents that built, because we didn't build all these. I mean, 275, the three apartment buildings that up on the corner of Despard has that many units.
Just one cautionary thing that might be in that though, is that a rental unit doesn't have its own folio. So if you have an apartment building with 58 rentals, it's only going to have one folio because it's based on the land. So that could be a part of that discrepancy, is that this is 275 new units or new parcels of land, but there could be hundreds of individual rental units that don't have their own
I
fee
understand
simple
that,
title. So
But
that
the
would account for
Census
some.
Canada says residential units for living. So they 7,100 some odd residential units. So somewhere along the line, yeah, it's not folios, it was units is how, then that's what I was questioning, because that makes a significant difference, especially to next year's taxes, 2023. If we've added 600 units onto our tax base, that's a lot of revenue coming in to the city that we're not looking at this point in time. So we need to find that out before we do our calculations. Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
We'll have this conversation in 3 weeks.
Okay, just another chart, just to show some trending on our assessment numbers and our population trends. Both the assessments and the population are increasing. And so when we look ahead at that, I think we expect that's going to continue for some time, just given the level of development permits and such that are coming through. Where that kind of levels off and when we hit that 15,000 remains to be seen. But it does show, you know, that folio count, the assessment, the population, everything is upwards. So we see this pressure in the city as it relates to employees, as I mentioned, with the recruiting and retention as those housing costs go up. And we're seeing it in some of our contractors. They're having to pay more people to get them to come and work. So again, that's translating into some increased costs in the financial plan. Oops. So speaking of employees, obviously they're the ones who deliver the services in the city. To give you some numbers around that, in 2021, we had about 90 FTEs. 22 of those are exempt, and the majority of the remainder are QP staff. And we have 2 short-term special project managers. Council approved at the end of 2021 a number of new positions. And this is where we get into that higher demand for service as our population increases. So 2 new caretaker custodians, another bylaw officer that's on the ground, another laborer that's working in our operations, as well as the opportunity to have some co-op students in a variety of departments in the city. And then related to all of our capital infrastructure initiatives, a 2-year term that would be helping us with some of the asset management planning and the new accounting standard related to capital assets that needs to be implemented. Our collective agreement expires at the end of 2022. So the increase that's reflected in the financial plan is the negotiated increase of 2.25%. And that equates to about 215,000. So about 1.5% of taxes is just our wage increases. going forward with respect to negotiating a new collective agreement, we've got all of these inflationary pressures. So we don't yet know how that might translate into the collective agreement. Our neighboring municipalities have negotiated about 2% per year for the next 4 years. Whether we'll land in the same place when we're in this world of inflationary pressures remains to be seen. So we'll continue to put what we think is a reasonable assumption within the model, but that's one of the unknowns right now because our collective agreement is expiring at the end of this year. The recruiting and retention challenges that I spoke to, just in terms of, remaining competitive on our wages, as many municipalities around the province are coming up with ways to attract employees to their area, the cost of housing, jobs, entertainment and recreation. So those are some of the issues that we're looking at in the financial plan around employees.
Councillor O'Brien, did you have your hand up too?
Sorry, Your Worship. I just wanted to make one comment about the new positions that council approved for anyone that wasn't at those meetings. All of these positions provide added service, so they're evenings and weekends that we weren't providing. So that was I think, important discussion point for council when you approve those, and just for the benefit of folks that maybe missed that conversation.
Thank you. Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. And on that same vein, yes, I was picking that up to the fact that I'm just doing that rough math in my head. We're showing a 90 FTE full-time equivalents anyways at this particular point, but adding the 22 approved late in the year anyways was basically, those are all going to be like, I count 5 additional full-time equivalents plus the co-op students. We round that off into 1 maybe. So actually we're adding roughly, I'm just guessing, on the co-op students. So I'm suggesting that we may be increasing our staff by 6 full-time equivalents. So just let the public know, as our CAOs suggested, that it's to cover a lot of those extra evenings and so forth. So it's providing extra services to our residents here, which is important for them to realize that 6 new people plus the other 90 anyways are going to try and keep up with all the requests that are made.
Can I ask the question to either yourself or to the CAO? Do we have any idea, let's say 2018, what the staff complement was at that point in time?
Yeah, I think relatively close to that. I don't think there's been new employees. I think there's been replacements within, but yeah.
We've held, I guess the point I was trying to make is that we've held level for the last 3.5 years without it. So these, if you look at it, we've added these 5, and as Councillor O'Brien has indicated, but when you look at it over a 5-year period and a 9.7% growth in population and everything, it really, I think that the staff here have done an amazingly good job of carrying out the workloads based on the service levels that they're providing. So I think it's important.
Thank you, Worship. So council, again, I think in 2018 or very early in 2019, gave us approval to redeploy within the existing complement. And so we have done a lot of that, where we've eliminated, say, a management position and put in more than one QP position, or we've used the term, we used the grant, the COVID grant for some of the term positions. So we've certainly tried very hard not to increase the overall complement. And it's been quite good, I think, up until now. The only thing we can't do is provide that extra service in terms of like weekends and evenings, but definitely a modest change in our numbers, which we can speak to because we don't have anywhere to put any new people. So we know that there's not been that many.
It's it goes to say a lot to the senior team here that have managed to do what you're saying and move people around and to where they're needed and where they're the most effective for the city itself and for the population. I've got nothing but accolades for everybody that's worked hard on this. So that's all I was putting through here. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Your Worship. I just had a question about the extra bylaw officer. Does this mean that that officer will be on patrol at night or on duty at night? Just to clarify.
Sorry if I may, Your Worship, evenings and weekends. So we have now 2 bylaw officers that would, they're seasonally evenings. So they work 8 to 4 in the off season when it's dark and not much is happening. And then I believe it's April 1st, they switch to evenings, but those 2 members work exclusively weekends. So all throughout the year, they work weekends, but just 8 to 4 and then till 6, sometimes a little bit later, but mostly till 6 PM in the high peak season.
Okay. Good,
Okay.
good job.
Just to touch briefly on infrastructure and capital assets. Obviously, this is the critical part of our service delivery, and we need assets and infrastructure that is in good working order. Council already has a number of initiatives in our financial plan from last year, including that 2-year term position that I mentioned, the upcoming asset management program, which we've got some good energy and some good new staffing that has skills in this area. We're doing a railway wells groundwater study. There's some video inspections for sewer and drainage, that linear infrastructure. That's already in the plan from last year. Some of the things that will be coming to you with respect to this next 5-year plan is looking at some asset valuation and condition assessments that'll feed into some of those programs. Some master plans related to water and sewer and community park that have been in the financial plan but are kind of now catching up into the current. We've deferred most of the kind of construction capital projects that were in 2022 to really focus on some of these planning pieces to build that sustainable model related to the maintenance and replacement of infrastructure assets. And then doing some work coming up in the next couple of years on service level definitions. Again, as our population grows, there may be different requests for different service levels depending on what areas we're looking at, whether that's parks or water or sewer. So that's information that may be coming to you, but we can do some work around that as we work through our asset management plans, especially in terms of defining when those need to be replaced. Okay, another piece of this is just funding sources. And what I would propose to you is that our operations, our everyday operations, are funded generally from our everyday operational revenues like property taxes or utility fees, our investment income, any fees for service that we charge, agreements that we have, and that needs to sustainably support those operations. We also actively and enthusiastically apply for grants whenever we can, whether that's for new capital projects or sometimes they're operating in nature. So Council will be receiving a report this month that'll speak to what proportion over the last number of years have we been successful in getting grants for various capital projects, and it has been quite significant. And often, as you've seen, they fund maybe 50% or 75% of a project, and that is certainly significant when we're looking at some of this new infrastructure or even new initiatives. We also have reserves in the city. There's statutory reserves like our land sale reserve. So when the city sells land, it goes back into that reserve and can be used to fund future capital projects. There's also non-statutory reserves where we put away funds related to future expenditures. An example of that is our snow removal. We have a bit of a reserve, so when we've got a peak year, we can dip into that as needed or contribute to it on years where it's light. We have gas tax, we have development cost charges. We sometimes receive donations or bequests, sometimes of nominal amounts and sometimes of significant amounts. We received a number of years ago quite a significant amount, approaching 200,000, that was for community park or other parks works. So sometimes we have opportunities like that to use that funding to build a city amenity or be part of an initiative where we're expanding parks projects. And then there's other things come along. So as we move through the financial plan, I'll try to identify what you might have where we have options on using different types of funding sources beyond just looking to property taxes. And typically a best practice around that is to use the property taxes for our basic sustainable works, and then to use some of these other funding areas for the different types of things, capital or special initiatives or special projects. So we'll try and identify those for you as we go along. Just to drill down a little bit on gas tax funding, because I know that this is a significant area of funding. It is something that typically has been funding we receive every year. It's not something we have to specifically apply for, and the reporting related to it is relatively easy, unlike some grants that have a lot of reporting related to them. So just to give you an idea of where we are at the end of 2022, I expect our balance is going to be about 4.7 million based on what was allocated during 2021. The current allocations that are in the financial plan from prior years is about $3.6 million already. And that could be changed, but that was what was in last year's financial plan. So of that year-end balance, there's about 1.1 million that is unallocated to projects. So it's still sitting in reserve. In addition to that, we have 2 more years of gas tax to be received, 2022 and 2023. And then the program officially is coming to an end. All that means is the current agreement ends. UBCM, who administers the program, is encouraging municipalities to actively spend their gas tax reserves so that that supports the ask back to the federal government for more similar funding. And I know that the upper levels of government love to announce this type of funding as well, right? It builds real services, real infrastructure. And certainly the city has been able to take advantage of this. And right now, the expenditures we have it allocated to are things like road replacement, including pedestrian upgrades. So maybe we're adding a sidewalk or a pathway, LED lighting, and then LED street lights, the lighting in the community park. So we don't have an indication from UBCM yet. I did contact them as to whether that agreement would be renewed. They don't know that yet. They also can't say you must spend. It's kind of soft that way, but I would encourage you to think about it as we look through different packages and that have been proposed, as we look at different initiatives to consider using the gas tax. The next slide just gives you an idea of where some of these things could be used on things that are within our financial plan or proposed for the next 5 years. Things like trails. And so some of them that we're looking at are wetlands or Maple Glen or Rathtrevor. Infrastructure plans, so that sustainable community planning like storm water master plans or sewer master plans. Gas tax can be used for that. A lot of asset management initiatives can be funded with gas tax. Some of the sports courts or other recreational infrastructure can be funded by gas tax. New last year was that fire halls construction can be funded with gas tax. And like I said, that was brand new last year. Looking at disaster mitigation and climate change impacts, a lot of that has been added that it can be funded through gas tax. Some of our parks, as I mentioned, recreational infrastructure, so some of the user analysis or master planning in the community park, as well as somewhat related to the climate change impacts is that water conservation or demand management, those types of plans. So in the early days of gas tax, it was quite a narrow window of what it could be spent on. It's actually quite broad now. So I encourage you to think about that as a funding opportunity in a year like this, when I think we have some real cost pressures, both for the city and for our taxpayers. Okay, that was kind of just a bit of a lay of the land. We're going to get into spending packages now. Is there any questions before I move forward with this? Okay. What I'd like to say up front first is just knowing what I just talked about is that senior staff has reviewed each of these spending packages with a real critical lens, looking at things that are related to health and safety or other risk factors or efficiencies where staff can be more efficient with the use of a tool or some sort of change in operations. So the spending packages that are being presented to you today have already been evaluated with that lens, and senior staff is not bringing forward things that they thought were discretionary. These are things that we really felt were important through that lens, that health and safety and other risk factors. So we'll go through those one by one. Directors of these various departments are available online. So if we have questions that I can't answer, they can come on and answer any of those questions for you. So they're available just a click away there. In your agenda package, this is just a summary, and I'm not going to go through this for hard on everyone's eyesight. What I really wanted to do here was list them out for you, as well as identify some options for financing these. And that goes back to all of those funding sources that we talked about. So I've identified, that doesn't mean you necessarily have to go with those, but I just wanted to make you aware that those are alternatives for funding these. And as well to notice that some of the ones that are in the package aren't actually for 2022. We're trying to take a longer view on some of these things. So you'll note that 3 of the fire hall ones actually aren't to be implemented until 2023. I've listed them here just so that you're aware that they're there for your consideration. but they don't actually start in 2022. So we'll just go through these one by one, but that just provides a bit of a summary for you to refer to. The first is for our building inspection area, and these are Prospero mobile building inspection software. And the Tempest and Prospero are what we use in the city for all of our land and property administration. So it's used by both planning and building inspection and finance. And so that's where we track all of the things related to any one property. What this software would allow our building inspectors to have is on their phones, they could be updating and doing their building inspections and inputting the data in real time. Right now, they would come back to the office. They will take notes in the field, come back, and then input it into our Prospero system when they get back to the office. So this would be a significant increase in their efficiency. We also see it as a trial that it could be used in other departments, just because everywhere we go in the city, we're dealing with city property, of course, but it might be something that our operations crew could use. So we see the two employees in building inspection using this as a bit of a trial, and then we could maybe roll it out if we find that it's really effective and efficient for those staff. The initial cost is about $18,000, and then there's a $1,600 annual operating funding going forward. And I would suggest that this would just be funded out of operating funds. We don't have a reserve or anything related to this. And I'll try and identify this with each spending package is what's the upfront cost? What are any costs that are ongoing? And then where could it be financed? Our director of planning is available if you have any questions about this. Okay, we'll go on to the next one then. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just looking up something.
The question is based around, you mentioned about this being an efficiency for them. Is this item though kind of strikes me in that as more of a nice to have than a necessity? Are they able to function properly still without this software?
I'll let our director of planning respond to that.
Certainly, if I may. Well, we're certainly operating without the software now. You know, as our inspection demands increase, this is one way to improve efficiency so that we're better able to handle those increases without other resource increases being required.
I may have follow up.
Yeah, please.
What kind of capacity are you guys currently operating at?
So we currently have 2 full-time building inspection staff. We have in the past had 2.5 FTEs. Depending on on volumes, that whether 2 staff will be sufficient, I don't know. But certainly, on some days an inspector might do 8 inspections. When they come back to the office, each inspection might involve 15 minutes of data entry. So it is adding capacity for us to do more in the field inspection work with the current staffing resources that we have.
Did you get your answer? Okay.
Okay. The next is something that is it sits in finance, but it is used by most of the PCTC, and that is our folder stuffer machine. Through our property tax notices and our 2 utility bills annually, as well as other mailings, we fold and stuff about 55,000 sheets per year. This was in the capital plan already for 2025 replacement. It is not working well, and we're spending a lot of additional funds for special typesetting, printing in other places, and this doesn't handle the folding of certain types of ink. We even had staff that were actually hand stuffing and folding last year for one of our utility bills. So we are running into some efficiency problems on this as we're having to deal with additional repair problems. And to replace it is about $14,000 and an annual operating cost of $1,500. Again, funding out of operating funds related to this. And as I mentioned, it is in the capital plan, just a couple of years out. Any questions on that? I'm the person to respond to that one.
Councillor Patterson.
And thank you, Your Worship. Now, this is a cost, so it's city-owned. Is this machine able to be leased, or what are the cost differences?
I haven't done the full analysis on the lease versus purchase. There are a number of different ways you can lease these machines, including directly from the company, but there's also kind of side financing companies. In fact, I was contacted by one yesterday that said, we can set up these leases for your equipment if that's something that is beneficial. So we would certainly look at that and evaluate the two costs as part of that purchase evaluation. So going to RFP, you might say, give us your lease cost and give us your outright purchase cost. And we could evaluate that at the time. So I don't know at this point whether it would be more beneficial to lease it or not. The second one that's coming out of finance is related to an asset valuation and condition assessment. This is something that hasn't been done in a fulsome way for the city since 2009, when the tangible capital asset accounting standard was implemented. So it's required for a number of different initiatives that staff are working on this year. So I'm hoping that by doing one really holistic and fulsome evaluation, that we can use that data for a number of different areas. The first being our asset management planning. We really need to know what our condition assessments are and our replacement costs to develop accurate forecasts for replacement and accurate costs related to that. The new asset retirement obligation standard that's required by the end of 2023 also requires an assessment of our assets. We also know that looking at our insurance values and replacement costs in many areas have really significantly increased. We want to make sure that our insurance that we have in place for our property insurance is sufficient. When you look at situations like Lytton last summer, it's important to look at our insurance coverage and say, as we get more and more of these climate impacts that are very significant, including even in the Fraser Valley and things like that, we want to make sure that our insurance is in place and that it's valued at a replacement cost that is reasonable for assets that we would intend to replace. What we're seeing in a number of municipalities is that they're looking at some of their older infrastructure and saying, given the opportunity, would we actually rebuild that? And so giving some critical thought around that as to whether you actually do still fully insure it or whether you have priorities in that insurance. And then just our long-range capital planning is supplemented by all of this information by giving us better costing and making sure that that forecasting is accurate. And that goes to whether we want to be putting money into reserves to fund that replacement infrastructure. We obviously want those numbers to be as accurate as possible if we're going to actually be allocating funding towards that. We're estimating cost around for this about 150,000. We have had Suncor do it previously, but some neighboring municipalities have used others. So it seems to be quite an active market for this right now because of that new accounting standard. So I'm hoping that that will translate into more competitive pricing. This could be funded out of gas tax. Otherwise, it could come out of our operating funds.
Councillor Fratz.
Thank you. You may have said it, I just didn't quite understand it this way, so I just wanted for clarity here. Does asset management then start also incorporating replacement costs into capital building projects as far as the budgeting process? So when we're building something, let's say like amphitheater or a pool or so on, we're not just looking at the cost to develop it, but the cost of replacement years down the line, knowing that, you know, for building a pool, we're not going to just in 30 years, we're not going to say, okay, we're done with it now. We're going to always want to keep one. Will asset management incorporate those budgeting processes into it?
Right, through your worship. Absolutely. I think that once it's a little bit going backwards and a little bit going forward. Right now, we need to develop asset management plans for all of our asset classes so that we lay out what those replacement plans are. But certainly it should be completely operational for us that for every asset we bring forward for construction, for replacement, that part of that report to council or part of our consideration is how does it get replaced or does it get replaced? And so when we're working with community user groups, do they contribute to that replacement or is it something that's funded through our reserves, through our property taxes? Because if we take that approach where not only are we looking at the purchase, we're looking at the replacement, we can factor in contributions to reserves for an estimated lifespan of that such that by the time we get to the end of that 50-year, 100-year life, we've got money in reserves that would fund that replacement. So you're absolutely right about how that should kind of go going forward. It should be operationally what we do.
Councillor O'Brien, then Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. And question, Jetta, this asset valuation, what, am I correct in saying that part of this process will include natural asset management?
Through your worship, yes, I think that that is now, probably in the last couple of years, there's been a real turn to doing the natural asset management and looking at all of those natural assets, whether it's trees or parks, and how can we use those in our service delivery, in our asset management, certainly with respect to climate change impacts. So
Yeah.
I believe all of these assessments with, we would obviously lay out the scope, but that would certainly be one of them for us, because as you know, we have amazing natural assets in the city. And I know that Gibson's has been a leader in this way, as well as Powell River. So neighboring municipalities that I've chatted with both of them about what they're doing in that regard. And it's a very interesting work, and they're saving, in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars in some of their solutions to stormwater management and things like that. It's very, very cool.
That's great. Thank you. Because that definitely plays into the climate action plans that we have in place. And I really appreciate that. And for the public to recognize that we are actually evaluating the city of Parksville natural assets, of which we have many. So that's definitely a step in the right direction to control the GHGs. So thank you for that.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Jed, I'm just wondering, you probably would have told us this, but any other grant funding available for this sort of thing? Or is this just something that would have to come from these two operating funds and gas tax fund?
Yeah, through your worship. There maybe is the answer. There are a number of grants that we're seeing coming online related to climate impacts, especially following, obviously the climate emergencies that happened in Lytton, the fire season last year, the water in the Fraser Valley in the fall, and what we're seeing in BC alone, right? So we are seeing some grants coming. So it may be that part of it might be able to be funded. Maybe the natural assets part could be funded through a different type of grant. So certainly our manager of communications keeps a very close eye on those grant options, provides them to senior staff, and we do critically evaluate to see, okay, are there any projects we have in planning right now that could be applicable to those grants? And we certainly try and apply for those.
Thanks. Great answer.
Okay, the next few are related to IT and engineering. The first is a cybersecurity audit, and this is something that is becoming more of a risk factor, unfortunately, and we're seeing it especially in government organizations. I'm aware of one municipality in BC that was hit with a very significant cybersecurity attack, which is different than a ransomware attack. They're not always looking for money. Sometimes it's just the inconvenience of having your systems locked up for months. I know in this case, they, I think, didn't have operational email for about 6 months and were texting amongst their employees and things like that, really held them up. So it's a real issue. It can bring things to a halt. There's issues in other countries, for example, in Ireland, where their health system was locked up with a cybersecurity attack. So it's real and it's impactful. So a couple of our neighboring municipalities have had these cybersecurity audits done, and essentially you have someone come in on a consulting basis. Often they're trying to hack into your system to identify vulnerabilities or weaknesses. Our staff, we don't have enough staff to have a specialized person for this area. So it would be someone where we would have an external person come in and try and determine those vulnerabilities and then provide recommendations to remediate any of the threats that we might have. The estimated cost on this is about $55,000, and then just estimating what some of the remediation might be around that, just ballparking, maybe there would be a $5,000 cost per year going forward for software solutions or other ways that maybe it's subsequent check-ins to see how our system is doing. This would be funded out of operating funds, and our Director of Engineering and IT is available if you have questions on this.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Once again, my question is, any chance that this could be funded from any other grant, security grants, and given what's happening in the world right now with security.
Through your worship, not that, this is one I don't think I've seen anything. Sean, have you seen any grant opportunities related to this?
I haven't seen any specific grant opportunities related to this.
If I may, your worship, we did just get the COVID grant, which was very much focused on not so much the security side of things, but the connectivity and virtual accessibility. So maybe they kind of feel like they've covered that part of it off. And we were able to leverage quite a bit of that, like several $100,000 to upgrade our servers, to provide the fiber optic link to the yard, and to get some other like laptop stations and things. So we have been able to fund a lot of the IT stuff through different grants. But again, same answer, if they come up, Deb brings them to us every couple of weeks. And if it's in our budget, and if we have a scope, we're usually able to act on the grants as they come in. So not guaranteed we get them, but at least we're ready to apply.
Yeah, that's a good point. And with the purchase of all of those laptops that gave that connectivity during COVID, that's a much more secure connection to the city than having staff log in from their own personal computers. And so that was part of the reasoning also behind that. So I feel like we've already made steps in being more secure just as a result of those purchases already. Okay. I'll go to-
Sorry, didn't see your hand up
Oh.
over there.
Thank you, worship. Yeah, I think since my thumb injury, I think you've noticed my hand a
Oh,
bit
poor
more.
baby.
But it's been good. But through to Director of Finance, Belinda. Belinda, could you tell me, and maybe this is a question for the IT operator, but maybe you could mention is there any way of finding some insurance savings because we get this audit done? It's much the same as, various things that are done in other scenarios where they offer when you put a alarm system in your home, you get a 15% discount, that type of thing. So is there any kickback or any kind of opportunities to save? Because insurance fees have gone up about 33%, I think, if I remember you saying that in the first piece. So thank you.
Sean, I'll just add one comment here before you have an opportunity to respond. Just through your worship. So I'm not exactly sure about that. What I do know is that we have a cyber policy to deal with some of the costs that would result from the impact of that. And the cost of that just about tripled this year. So it's a real issue and it's everywhere. But that would be something that would be a good question we have our cyber policy through MIABC. And so perhaps that's a question that I could ask. And maybe if we do have this periodically, that there's some amount of savings on that. Sean, do you have any information on availability of that?
No, I don't. Although I do know was when we just applied for insurance, that was one of the questions. Have you conducted a cyber security audit? So that must impact the rate somehow. So I would think once we've done it and then implemented some recommendations, we should be able to go back and say what we've done.
Great.
Councillor Frass.
Thank you. This cybersecurity audit, I think, is a very important component here too. I know it's the things we don't see. It's easy to brush off, but when I think about how much the communication in our city and operations like our water treatment plant and so on, I imagine that if we went down with some of those IT issues, that it put some of the core functions here at jeopardy. So yeah, I definitely appreciate this one. I'm interested to see kind of what we get back as where weaknesses, where we can make improvements. But thank you for this. The other thing too, just mention, it's okay to correct your name being wrong there. Sometimes we all lose track of everybody that we work with. So
Yeah, no
appreciate
worries.
those.
Okay, the next in the IT area is the Microsoft System Center Configuration Manager. I don't want to say that too quickly. And really what this relates to is it's an efficiency item that allows our IT staff to do numerous updates and do them remotely. As you can imagine, with all of the different software that the city runs in all of our different departments, there's updates to these all the time, sometimes to address safety concerns with hackers or whatever, but sometimes it's just the annual updates for various software. So this would allow them to do it much more rapidly, do it from their own workstations. There's a COVID safety impact in that they're not going around to every workstation and doing the updates. So really this is coming from an efficiency perspective and also just making sure it's a standardized update to every workstation in the city. The estimated cost is $15,000 and then an annual licensing fee of $3,200. And this would be funded out of operating funds. Any questions on that one? The next is an engineering department item, and this is to replace their plotter scanner. The current one is more than 20 years old and it cannot be repaired anymore. The parts are unavailable and it really doesn't work anymore. And so this is something they most often use for scanning now more than plotting, but it is a combination unit. The estimated cost is $25,000 and that would be funded out of operating funds. Any questions on that one? And again, that's the big pieces of paper, print maps and property pictures and things like that. Okay, next we're into the parks and operations area. The first is the resurfacing related to the Maple Glen Trail. And as you can see in the picture, there's roots that are coming up. It's made the surface quite variable. It's got accessibility issues as a result of that. And operations staff has been limping it along with different patches and repairs, but it's getting to a point where that's even more difficult. And we get to the point where we just highlight it with fluorescent paint there to make users aware of that. So it is, it was resurfaced about, or maybe created about 20 years ago. And it's the first 160 meters of the walkway from Despard that have been impacted the most. And the resurfacing proposal, again, this is a safety issue, would provide safe access and even footing to make the trail as accessible to as many people as possible. Obviously, this reduces the city's risk of any claims related to that. The estimated cost is about $20,000, and that would be funded out of operating funds.
Councillor Wilson and Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. So we spoke about this when we had our workshop, and the $20,000 would cover resurfacing with the same material. But then we talked about the option of using crushed limestone as a more environmentally friendly, longer term, and probably safer option. So is there any way that you're going to factor that difference into the cost and let us choose, or I know that there may be a supply problem with getting the limestone. I understand that. But even in some of the areas perhaps where it's really raised, is it feasible that that section could be replaced, or will that create more of a problem? I'm just thinking to resurface something with the same material that really doesn't last. It's not the best solution. That sometimes you're better to bite the bullet and pay the money and do things the right way.
Through your worship, I don't, if our Director of Operations, Belinda, is available, she's likely the best one to respond to that question.
Through your worship, the cost for either is going to be looking about the same amount of monies, and preference for operations will be to use the limestone. We'll just have to see in those areas that we can use that versus the asphalt. So we will go with limestone first, unless it's not a viable option for us.
Thank you. Okay.
Okay, great.
Besides the price of oil's going up to $109 a barrel
Right.
yesterday. So
Yep, exactly.
the asphalt's going to cost an arm and a leg and whatever else we can ransom for that.
Yeah.
So.
The next spending package is to do some user analysis in our community park. And really this involves commissioning consultants and or co-op students to analyze both quantitative and qualitative data related to usage and needs of the park. This is looking at what are we using it for right now and what might future needs be, including things that are actually already in our financial plan related to community park, reviewing capacity and infrastructure requirements related to the park, And then this information would be used to feed into a number of different plans, whether that's our community park master plan. It impacts the stormwater management down in the city. There's transportation and active transportation plans that we have. All of this would be used to provide council with information that would impact all of that other planning that would need to be done. The estimated cost is about $50,000. This is something that could be funded from gas tax, or we could use our operating funding. And Director of Operations would be available to answer any questions on this if you like.
Go ahead, because I was going to go, so. please.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through to Jetta. We had discussion anyways when we got further details, and then I studied this further since that we had the last meeting. I'm just not, I can't get my head around supporting this. I just don't feel that it's a worthwhile expenditure of $50,000. I won't go into full details, but yeah, I just don't think that this is a proper. The requirement wasn't justified to myself to satisfy me okaying $50,000. Let's leave it at that. Thank you.
I'm sorry, did you have your hand up? Couldn't see.
Thank you, Your Worship. I've had that up. You may be thinking about the same thing I am, but or maybe we shouldn't be talking about what we spoke about with extra help from the PDBA on this. I'm not sure whether that's, you want to wait on that one?
I'm sitting here looking at these numbers. Let me just put my points in.
Yeah,
and then
go
you can-
ahead.
All right, and then you can, if I don't touch what you're thinking, then you can come right in. But I'm looking at this, and we're the total of the out of the operating fund side of it that you're recommending is $250,000, or that works out to about 1.2% of our tax revenues. And you know, I've been keeping track over here, writing on my file folder, which I promised myself I would quit doing, but I did it anyways. I've got 1.2% on the spending packages here. I've got approximately, we're guessing at 2.5% for the police. We've got a 2.25% wage increase for staffing here across. And that's nothing to do with any cost increases for the normal ongoing stuff. We're at 6% increase right there. And so we've got to start looking at where some tough decisions have to be made. And I'm sitting here thinking, not all that far off of what Councillor O'Brien's saying. Is it that significant that $50,000 can't be cut out of our budget at this point in time? I know it's a nice to have, but is it something that we need to go? I can't support this one either. So I'm fully against this particular one at this point in time. So Councillor Wilson has left the room. Councillor Fraz.
I agree. This one, I see there is importance and value in it, but I think at this time it's one that that we could perhaps put off or take off for now. Do we need to do it through a motion here today to remove this one, or how shall we proceed with?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, through your worship, these are all things that are for consideration. So I think what would happen is if you were specifically wanted to make a motion, obviously that would be okay. We would bring them all back and you could deal with them once you've had the whole picture.
Okay.
So you could either choose to take it out completely or just defer a year or whatever you prefer to do. So either of those would be fine.
Okay.
I'm prepared to wait, but till we get the numbers, because I don't know at this point in time as far as what the real end result is going to be for tax increases. But I'm prepared to wait, but that's going to be probably one of the first ones I'm going to zero in on when it comes up time. Councillor O'Brien and then Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just hearing the staff get some direction so that they don't waste any more time on it. I think it would be probably proper to put through a motion at this time to take it off. I looked at the CAO and it was kind of, we could put it to a motion at this particular time. So I'd like to put that through this time. Thank you.
Seconded. Did remove.
Just to remove it. Sorry. Yes.
Comment, or are you?
Comment, Your Worship. Seeing how we have the overall park master plan in the budget for 2023, wouldn't it be more prudent to defer it to the 2023 and add this analysis to the master plan for the park, rather than just a complete removal.
Through your worship, I think that was part of, was perhaps splitting it and doing some of this analysis up front and then rolling it into the master plans. So I would expect that as part of the master plan, there would need to be some consideration of that. So, but that could be brought back to council then.
If I may, your worship, that's
may.
basically what we would do. We'll just rebudget it and look at whether or not 2023 still works to do the master planning next phase. So we'll just go back to the kind of drawing table on that one and figure out what the best option is. We might be able to be creative with co-op, depending what happens with co-op students and other things, and reaching out to partners. So we'll certainly look for another option or a way to deal with this one.
Councillor Wilson.
Sorry, thank you, your worship. I missed that conversation on the co-op students. So that did happen?
No, we haven't had that yet.
Oh, okay.
Sorry, if I may, your worship, we're just going to go back to the drawing board on this one. We have a motion on the floor to remove the spending package from this year. So staff will take, depending on the outcome of the vote here, we'll take that and just go back and figure out other options or other alternatives that we could explore without having a spending package, without having like the cost, basically.
And there's nothing to say staff can't put it back in next year's budget requests.
Yeah, that's what, if we need to, and we can't come up with some other solution, that's what we will do. We'll rebudget it as part of next year's work plan and figure out what needs to happen at that time.
All right. I'm going to call the vote on this
So-
one. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry I missed that part.
That's all right.
So this motion on the floor right now is to remove it. And then as Councillor Patterson suggested, that it be moved over to the parks. So by removing it now, could it still go back into roll that back into your park assessment later?
2023.
I think what I'm hearing from staff is that come next year, if they still think this is something they need to do, then they can put it back in the budget at that time and request it, the $50,000. Is that what I'm hearing?
And if I may, we'll look for other ways or other alternatives that we could maybe try and achieve almost the same objectives without going that way. And if not, then we'll rebudget it as part of the master planning process.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for answering.
All right, thank you. I'm going to call the question then. All those in favor of pulling this one out? Unanimous. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Keep going. I think pretty straightforward then.
The next is the completion of the works that was started in the Parksville wetlands last year. And this is related to the Coldwater Creek section. The parks team completed part of it last year, and this all relates to ensuring that we have emergency access to the wetlands, whether that's for fire or police or ambulance. And so the rough part of the trail has been completed. This $60,000 cost would be to do the limestone cap on it. And what we have had feedback from people using the trail is that how that limestone cap really is great for accessibility, including those people that have vision issues, that lighter stone really helps them. And it also is friendly to the environment, allows, that leaching of the water through and things like that. So helping with that root protection and as Belinda's noted here, the natural hydrological connectivity. So we don't get some of what we're seeing in Maple Glen in terms of where we use asphalt and we get the heaves in the asphalt. So it also ensuring that we're tracking the trail minimizes human impacts off trail in the wetlands, which we're obviously trying to preserve as well. So Director of Operations is available to answer any questions. We would propose that this could be funded from DCCs because it was a new trail connection, and that's how last year's piece was also funded. So again, $60,000 as the estimated cost on that related to the limestone.
Councillor Wilson?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to say the same remark I made before about this. It really works well. Lots of positive feedback from Shelley Park on Shelley Creek Park. It is easy to walk on. It's easy to ride on, push any kind of mobility device. It's easy to see at night. So all around it's a really nice product.
Moving right along.
Right on. The next one is something called thermoplastic road marking. And this is related to a safety issue in that this is more permanent type of road marking than regular road paint. What we became aware of last year is there was a worldwide shortage of regular road marking paint. This is something that is typically used for pedestrian crossings and stop bars, that high safety factor. And rather than doing a little bit every year when this has significant mobilization and demobilization costs, that if we make it an every 4 years recurring minor capital item, that we would get more value for our money and it would be more efficient in marking those areas. So the cost would be an increment of 50,000 per year, and it would be an every 4 year cycle that we would see that on. It would be funded from our operating funds because this would be just something that would be operational in our roads area. And this would be in addition to the regular budget. Director of Operations is available if you have questions about this one.
Any questions? Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. And I get the reasons, the advantages of using the thermoplastic. But if I could do Director of Operations, Belinda, is it true that the biggest enemy of thermoplastic road markings is snowplows?
Through your mayor to Councillor O'Brien, if we allow things to build up, then snow plowing causes challenges. With thermoplastic road marking, it should be below the lowest grade that a snowplow will go through. The biggest factor for thermoplastic or any paint is actually the usage, the wear and tear of it, of vehicles turning. And that's why thermoplastic is used for stop bars, crosswalks, and places where we turn, because it has a much longer life than our regular road marking paints.
Any other questions? Moving right along.
The next is a utilities and roads mower. And this was something where the utilities department needed a new mower, and then sewer and water also needed a new mower. The roads and drainage crew is actually using a hand mower right now, which could lead to musculoskeletal injuries. And our water department has just got more going on and they needed to have a dedicated mower. So the two groups discussed and realized their scheduling would probably allow them to share one mower. So we would split the cost between the general fund, sewer, and water funds. And the upfront cost would be about $40,000 a year. And then it would be added to our equipment replacement reserve. So then the funding would be accumulated for its replacement in probably 10 years or something like that. So it would go in further to Councillor Frass's question about the asset replacement. It would fall into that right up front, and we would actually show it as a transfer to the equipment replacement reserve for the purchase of this equipment. Director of Operations can answer any questions on this if you have any.
Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. Probably a question for Director of Operations again. It's advising that it mows the acreage at Springwood Water Complex. I'm just wondering, does that include the fields behind the Springwood, all the ball diamonds and so forth? Or is this, it says around the Springwood Water Complex, which is just basically the dome and the water tower. I don't know, there's a lot of grass. I'm just trying to confirm, it's just the mower that mows all the general fields where the Parksville Royals play.
Through your mayor to Councillor O'Brien, no, it doesn't include our mowing of the fields. That we have multiple very large equipment that our Parks Department uses. This is for all of our right-of-ways around the actual reservoir areas, around the equipment areas that we have in that, our well areas, our reservoir site at Chop Bridge, and we have multiple sewer easements. And with our roads, instead of both groups actually requested a mower. So instead of having two mowers, we've worked really hard to get one mower to be shared between both work groups. So it's used continuously throughout the season. And so roads does a lot of our stormwater easements. And currently they have no power equipment. It's all done through push mowers. I shouldn't say not power equipment. They're not like the old fashioned push mowers with the grates on it. And so this would allow them to have a riding mower, which will help them reduce the musculoskeletal injuries that we're seen to have because of multiple hours on mowing easement areas.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Just a quick question, if I could, Belinda, while we're at it. Do we know how many hours a day or a week that we're spending with push mowers versus how many hours riding this thing around? Like what's the labor saving on this over a period of a summer? That to me seems like it would save almost the price of this machine over a very short period of time. She's coming back.
If I may, yes. When we look at the amount of areas that we can service, and I know there were some areas that it took us until October in that to get to because we had other issues with our larger equipment and our flails. This will allow us to provide a better service in a more timelier fashion. And the $40,000, even if you look at just one musculoskeletal injury, will easily counter those dollars in one injury or 2 years of the labor that it would take for us to do it through the push mowers.
Thank you.
Okay. The last one from the operations area is our water distribution and sewer Scada hardware. And I'll just note for you that this is a critical replacement item for 2022. This is the only one we've marked specifically as critical. So I did want to communicate that up front. But as you're likely aware, it's our Scada system that monitors the water distribution and sewer lift stations. It's at the end of its life, so it requires replacement. We did actually incur some service interruptions last year. And so this is very much due for replacement. It does involve software and programming upgrade as well as a hardware upgrade. It would be split between sewer and water, 25 and 75. And the estimated cost is $50,000 and would be funded from operating funds. Again, this is one of these underlying pieces of equipment that is absolutely essential for our operations in water and sewer. And just so you know, this is unrelated to the ERWS, which also has a separate SCADA system. This is just for City of Parksville utilities. Again, Director of Operations is available if you've got any questions on this.
We would look pretty silly if we turned it down and then found out we really needed it next year. So I think we're good.
Okay. The next few spending packages are related to the fire department, and our fire chief is available online if you've got questions about this. The first up is related to a reporting dashboard. Fire Pro is our software that the fire department uses to accumulate all of its operational statistics and training hours and things like that. This would be essentially an add-on onto that could provide more user-friendly data analysis, charts, graphs, things like that could be used to provide information operationally for the fire department, but also information to council or our public related to that. There is an opportunity to share the cost of this with the town of Qualicum Beach because we have similar operations. A similar platform could be developed for both and the cost shared. So the estimated cost would be $12,000 and that's proposed for 2023.
Councillor Wilson.
Thanks, Your Worship. Would that cost be split, that 12,000 be split if it's cost shared, be down to 6,000 each?
Chief Norris is online and he could respond to that.
Through your worship to Councillor Wilson, that's what we would be aiming for, was to have a cost sharing. So I'm not sure if it would be exactly $6,000 each, but it would be certainly less than 10 or even 8 if we shared the costs. So I don't have the exact numbers until we engage the consultant to make the database links. But yes, that's what we're hoping for, is close to 50-50 or somewhere in that ballpark.
Thank you. Councillor Frass.
Thank you through the mayor to our fire chief. Is this item strictly an efficiency item, or is this also allowing for the ability to do something we don't currently have the capability to do?
it really hinges mostly around efficiency, but also consistency. So the way the databases are set up, you can pull quite a bit of data out of them. And it's, part of it is to ensure that the data we're pulling out is coming from the same place consistently. To explain it, there's multiple ways to pull the data out. And so one of the reasons is to try to ensure the data is pulled out consistently. We're always reporting on the exact same data. The other thing is to improve efficiency. So currently the data is there. It takes quite a bit of time to compile it and then turn it into visual representations that people are easy for people to understand. So those are the two main reasons: consistency and efficiency.
Councillor Frass.
And then with that, how are you guys currently gathering that data? Is it like yourself that puts it together? Is it through the paid members of the department, or who is currently doing the legwork on getting this data together and entering it?
Mostly through the paid members. Most of it is done by myself and the administrative assistant. But the folks that are responsible for fire prevention areas or the training areas also do pull data out and use that in their particular portfolios.
Thank you. I'm going to hold off on my questions until I see what the whole package is for the fire department.
Sure. The next item related to the fire department is the mobile data terminals for computer-aided dispatch. And what this is to establish a replacement budget for equipment that we already have in all of our apparatus. So starting in 2023, what we would like to do is do a wholesale replacement of that equipment so that there's consistent equipment across the apparatus, and that so that we have a plan in our financial plan to replace this every 5 years. The 2023 cost would be $70,000 because that would include getting the appropriate mounting hardware related to the terminals that we would purchase. Subsequent to that, it would just be $50,000 because that mounting hardware wouldn't be required. This is used on the ground in the apparatus. It can be taken out to record incident information real time. It provides maps and things like that. So again, this is just to establish the replacement budget for equipment we already have. The fire chief is available to answer any more detailed questions about that. Oh, sorry, just to note, that would be funded through operating funds. And then, as you know, we have an RDN fee for service agreement that would provide funding as part of that whole picture of their service fee. So there would be a component that would be also funded by the RDN.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. So earlier on, you mentioned that the gas tax fund can be used for fire services or any, would that apply in this case?
Through the mayor, it's just for fire halls. Yeah.
Any other questions? Keep going, please.
Okay. The next is something that's been in the financial plan, I think, for likely a decade, and that's really the long-term replacement or upgrades or renovations related to the fire hall. And it has been in the financial plan for 2025 for a number of years. What this is doing is bringing forward, one, an update to those costs, because as we've identified already, the construction costs are very significantly increasing. And so to make sure that our 5-year financial plan is reflecting appropriate and accurate costing, trying to do an estimate upgrade for what might happen at the fire hall, as well as to look at the purchase of strategic properties near the fire hall related to that addition, renovation, all the things that might happen at the fire hall. So there's really 3 components noted here. The first being the potential land acquisition in 2022. And if you look at the financial plan from last year, really it looks at doing a couple of land acquisitions that are strategic in nature, and then doing the construction / renovation of the fire hall. So that land acquisition could be funded through our land sale reserve fund. And then looking at the cost of construction. So perhaps in 2024, ahead of that 2025 construction, an amount to be put in to do design and consultation around what needs are at the fire hall. And then 2025, having that construction amount in the financial plan. So there are a number of different ways this could be funded, including further funding from the land sale reserve, gas tax, as we noted. There would be a component that would be recovered through our RDN service fee for our expanded fire area that we provide services to, and then some component of operating funds. What I will note is that the original cost that was in the financial plan was $1.2 million. The fire chief has done some investigation of other fire halls that have been built in the Central Island region and is seeing significant cost increases. For example, even the fire hall at Deep Bay with a much smaller population was in the range of $2 million for renovation there. Nanaimo built a new fire hall and it was $20 million. So we're seeing very, very significant increases in construction. So bringing that forward proactively because it is within that 5-year window that we're looking at with the financial plan. The fire chief is available if you've got other specific questions related to this.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Directly to Jetta, what is the current reserves in the land sale?
I have that 1 second. So our balance at the end of 2020 was only $14,000, but because in 2022 we sold essentially 3 pieces of land, Bagshaw, Molliet, and then the Jensen block. By the time all of those settle out, and we also purchased that piece of property already related to the fire hall, there would be a remaining balance of about $2.1 million. And as you know, the Jensen property hasn't completed yet, but that would be assuming, and after that settles.
Any other questions? Councillor Chandler.
Thank you, Worship. And through to Jenna, would this also be something that would be applicable for RDN support? Would there be some dollars coming in from the outside areas?
Through your worship. So we renegotiate that agreement every 5 years, and there is a capital component within that in addition to the operating. So yes, it would be not kind of directly, but through that agreement, there's an averaging of capital costs, both for apparatus and fire hall and those types of things. So yes, it would. I can't give you an exact number on it, but it is part of that agreement.
Great, thank you. Is there any way that we could have you or the fire chief have that for us before we look at this number for next time around? Possibly.
Through the mayor, possibly. It's actually, this is our year of renewal. So it is something that's a little bit circular in that we're waiting to finalize our financial plan and they're doing theirs. And so we'll do our best to try and at least bring something forward on that. Fire Chief Norris, did you have anything to add on that or?
I would just say in terms of the RDN agreement, it's proportional to the total assessment values between our coverage areas and the city. So I'm not sure what the exact percentage is, but capital costs are apportioned that way in the agreement. So say it was 3/4, 1/4 or something like that. That's how those costs are apportioned.
Councillor O'Brien and Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Your Worship, and then through to Jetta. Following Councillor Patterson's questions regarding the land asset fund, I'm a little confused and just want a clarification now regarding, you were saying after the 3 properties closed that currently were for sale or sold, you were saying there would be a $2.1 million balance at the end of that time. Does that $2.1 million balance already reflect the first strategic property we purchased fairly recently and or another possible acquisition to follow? Has that money been deducted? And are we left with 2.1 at the end of that, or is it 2.1 million in there for that to come out of?
Through the mayor. So that is after the purchase of the first property.
After the purchase of the first property.
Right.
So we're left with 2.1 million.
Yes.
And then if we have any other acquisitions to make, it can come out of that one. Thank you.
Right. And I will just note that the land sale reserve, although it has land in the name, it can be used both for land and other capital. It's not strictly related to land purchases and sales. So it could be expended on construction of other infrastructure.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Worship. Yesterday I attended for you at the RDN meeting in regards to some of the budget discussions and that, and I missed where it's a lengthy binder and that where the RDN has capital costs for Fire Hall to Parksville specifically. So I'm not sure if, I think we've already asked the Fire Chief Norris if in the past, because I know that this is the 5-year renewal of that negotiation. Do we have a timeline for that through your worship to the Fire Chief?
Through your worship, if I understand the councillor's question correctly, you're asking the timeline on the renewal of the agreement?
Yes, please.
So the agreement is due to be renewed imminently within the next few weeks. And the agreement does account for our capital and operating budget. And then the apportionment is done as part of the agreement as per the calculation.
If I could add to that, Chief Norris, it's my understanding that after each 5-year increment, we do a bit of a reconciliation. So if there was something significant that had been added to the previous 5-year that wasn't picked up as part of that, there is an adjustment going forward.
Yes, I believe there's a reconciliation every 5 years, but also annually in terms of after each fiscal year. It's also looked at in order to appropriate the cost from the RDN and get the revenue. So I'm not an expert on the financial side of it. However, I believe that's how it's been carried out in the past.
Right, I think there are adjustments. And just through the mayor to Councillor Patterson, my understanding of where it lives in the RDN budget is, so say for French Creek electoral area, it would be listed as fire services in there as a 1-line number, like a service agreement. So it wouldn't be listed as part of the RDN's capital per se, because it's just a 1 line. So I think that's where it lives in their budget.
It's a requisition, just the same as we
Right.
do in reverse.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. Now that I've got the land figured out, I have another question, sorry. But so I get the fact that we have 2.1 million, that's after the one, and then hypothetically speaking, we spend another million on another, whatever. So we're gonna be left with 1.1 million out of the land asset fund. Now, Chief Norris has allowed for a budget of roughly $3.6 million. Anyways, would it not be prudent then? So I'm suggesting we have like about a 1 million left. So wouldn't it be prudent to set aside a reserve amount annually to get roughly close to that 3.6 million? To set that aside now, like on an annual basis, so that we don't in 2025 just have this $3.6 million renovation fee hit us upside of the head, instead of having already been saving for it because we know it's coming. But I'm just suggesting that could we set that aside? Is there some way of doing a reserve fund especially for this? And it could, as you have now indicated, it could be actually funded or allocated out of pending gas tax monies that are coming in for the, I think you suggested 23 and 24 or 22, 23 and 24. Could we not actually allocate some of those funds for that? Would that work? Some of those funds from gas tax? I'm just saying to try and start building a reserve now, so we're not hit with a wallop at the end.
Right, so through the mayor, obviously those are all alternatives that we could, in the financial plan, indicate that if there's a capital cost in there, we always indicate, okay, how is that going to be financed? So council could give direction that it's going to be financed partially by land sale, partially by a capital reserve, and partially by gas tax. And you could indicate the amounts of each of those you wanted to allocate essentially for that. With respect to the reserves, because we don't actually have a formal reserve contribution policy, and that gets back a little bit to the asset management, where if you knew you were replacing something 10 years out, you might start accumulating those funds. So we're only a couple, 3 years out now, right? So yes, you could decide to put an amount per year into our capital reserve that is not a statutory reserve. It's just at council's discretion to put amounts into the capital reserve. That said, the way the model works, as I understand it, is it also does kind of just fall out in the wash of the accumulated surplus. So I think it is good to designate those funds and to actively show the allocation of funding for that rather than leave it to come out of unallocated surplus. So I would encourage you to identify the funding sources so that it's known and it's set aside in the capital reserve, and it provides some surety around that as we move forward in the process. But that would be up to council's discretion, both with respect to the proportion of the funding that is used in each of those and which of those fundings are used.
Thanks, Your Worship. At what stage of the process would council take that initiative?
Through the mayor. I mean, certainly it could happen today, but there's a lot of numbers to come to you. So at any time this month, when we're bringing those kind of fulsome pictures of where we are in the budget, and especially when we're looking at the capital plan specifically, that might be the best time when we're really looking at what all the various capital projects are, because that's a significant one. It's within our 5-year window now. It's been moving up, right? So that's probably the best time so that you can look at it in light of all of the different funding sources. It might give you a better picture of, say, you're going to allocate more gas tax to other projects. There might be different proportions that you might use for all of those various projects. So what I would suggest is when we do bring that capital plan forward and we identify different ways that gas tax or other funding sources could be used, that might be your best time to give that direction.
Good advice. I want to see what the capital plan looks like over 5 years before we start shooting from our hips on these things. So let's see, because that's a large amount. I'm going to guarantee you that 3.6 ain't going to cover it. By that, especially in the next 3 or 4 years, it's going to be significantly more than that. So let's wait and see where the capital plan looks like, and then we're going to have to make some really hard decisions at that point.
Okay. I think what is positive when you have a very significant capital project like this is if there are a number of alternatives with respect to the funding, it does give council a lot of different decisions to make and gives you some opportunities to consider different ways of pulling that together. So that's a positive in terms of that list of opportunities for funding, is there may be ways to do that with something that is quite significant. Okay. The next one is more of an administrative item for the fire department, but critical all the same. And that's with respect to the operational guidelines that need to be reviewed and updated and renewed periodically. And so this was an item that was identified as part of the BEAR report, the fire services review that was done last year and the prior year. And it really provides guidance for the fire department's operations. And I forget how many there are, but there are many. And many of them have been placed for a long time and are due for renewal. There's an opportunity to cost share this as well with the town of Qualicum Beach, again, because operations are quite similar and best practices around some of these operational guidelines would apply to both. As well as there is a Fire Chiefs Association of BC project going right now where they're developing a number of templates for operational guidelines. So what the chief has suggested is that an estimated cost, and this would be for next year, would be about $50,000, but there could be an opportunity to reduce that significantly through two options, both a cost sharing with the town of Qualicum Beach, but as well as if these the Fire Chiefs of BC develop a good package of operating guidelines, it might just be a matter of taking those as a template and putting those in place with less review than would be required as a full consultation on them. So again, this is for 2023. The fire chief is available if you've got specific questions related to this.
Keep going.
Okay. The last spending package from the fire department is a 2022 item, and it is a critical safety item related to our firefighters. And this is related to the SCBA, the self-contained breathing apparatus. And we need 5 new SCBA for the reserve engine. And this is something we likely should have caught when we were doing the replacement of the apparatus, but it's something where we like to have a full set of SCBA in each of the apparatus. So the cost on this is $42,500, and it would be funded from operating funds. Again, the chief is available if you've got questions about this.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you. Through you to the fire chief. What is the lifespan of the apparatus?
Through your worship to Councillor Pattison, the lifespan of self-contained breathing apparatus is 15 years.
If I could add, we do have that in our plans, that longer term replacement, and it is a very significant item. So we try and forecast that out, as the chief has indicated, every 15 years.
Any other questions? All right, moving right along.
Okay, so that was all of the spending packages. Again, as I noted, that those are items that senior staff has assessed as being, you know, from a safety or efficiency or risk perspective, things that were important to bring forward to you this year. What I wanted to do also was identify some significant items that are already in the financial plan. And you'll see those at our meetings on the 23rd and the 30th as already in the plan. And so a couple of those, the pool and multiplex, we have $100,000 of carry forward that was in last year's plan that we're just bringing forward for further consultation, and an additional $150,000 in this year. So there's a total of $250,000 in the plan related to the pool multiplex consultation and investigation. What isn't in the financial plan is any estimate of a capital cost or operational cost related to that, because it's just too far out. My graphic there is kind of the crystal ball. We can't see into the future. We don't know what year that might hit if it's within the 5 years. So just so you know, that's not at all in the plan. There were a number of master plans that have been in the financial plan for a long time and have come forward, and they're now in 2022. And consistent with that approach to the capital assets and infrastructure this year, one of developing plans and sustainable financing and asset management around that. In this year, we have the water, storm drainage, and sewer master plans all in the plan. Initially, they were in there at $50,000. That price is probably closer to $150,000 each now. And so those amounts have been adjusted, but they have been in the plan for years. As you see, every year, we will look at what projects didn't get completed in 2021 and bring those forward to you for approval in 2022. Again, those won't bring extra taxation with them because they were already funded last year. So they'll just be brought forward at a net zero effect. But we want to, of course, make sure that they're in the 5-year plan so that that spending is approved by council for completion in 2022. Another significant resolution that council gave was with respect to doing a phase 1 and phase 2 assessment of the industrial park brownfield restoration. And that relates to where the landfill used to be. And so just a reminder that that'll be in the financial plan coming forward. It's a significant item, and you'll see that on the 23rd in our plans as they come forward. Other items that aren't reflected in the financial plan, and again, this is just to bring for your awareness, any kind of impacts to climate change and disaster mitigation. We obviously saw a lot of events in the last 12 months related to climate change impacts. We don't have any significant projects related to that right now. Things might come out of all of the planning and investigative work we're doing and valuations this year that might give council an opportunity to address some of that. There's been discussion about downtown revitalization. There aren't any projects in the financial plan related to that. And just further to a lot of the work we're doing this year, there may be a number of recommendations come forward from this work that we also haven't tried to estimate because we don't know what the results of those studies are going to be, including recommendations that come forward from our asset management program. And part of what that might be is, and I encourage this, is a development of a reserve program and plan that says we're going to fund the replacement of assets in a strategic and sustainable way. And so that might impact our financial plans by saying let's allocate monies every year towards the replacement of our assets and put that aside in specific funds. And that might come from accumulated surplus in an individual year that gets apportioned, and a number of local municipalities do that. They look at the end of the year and they say, we had surplus of $500,000. Let's very strategically add that to reserves funds for initiatives that are upcoming. The valuations and condition assessments that are being done for a variety of things may bring forward and identify areas that require remediation. And so there may be costs that come with that. We also might see an increase, a further increase in our insurance related to that if our replacement costs are significantly higher according to the assessments than what we have had in our insurance renewals related to that. As well as you'll recall that last year, and this will be a carry forward item, there was an operations yard environmental assessment being done. Again, there may be remediation related to the findings of that require funding of works at the operations yard if there are things that are identified there. None of those things are yet identified in the financial plan. If those works are completed and it's something that we could bring to you as part of the amended financial plan at the end of the year, or perhaps it's into next year's financial planning process. But there's some pretty significant things that I just want you to be aware we haven't tried to reflect or guess what is in there at this time. So with that, I'd welcome any more questions. As I said, there's lots of information coming to you this month, and I'm happy to take your questions on that or any other direction that council wishes to give us as we move forward in preparing the financial plan.
Councillor Chandler.
Thank you. Through the mayor to Jetta. I guess my question would be in respect to the gas tax, what was the cutoff date for that? You said that was going to go on for another 3 years, was it, or 4 years?
Through the mayor, there's actually only 2 more years of funding. It officially ends in 2024, but that's the federal government year end. So we'll get a disbursement in 2022 of about 608,000 and 2023 of 635,000. And that's it under the current agreement.
Thank you.
It's going to go on.
I think it probably will, but
There's no way in God's earth you're going to cut that one off. All right, any other questions? All right.
thank you very much.
so much. I jotted down a note saying what a great job you're doing.
Great,
So
thank you.
thank you very much for that. All right. Mrs. Weeks, are there any questions that have been received from the public so far? Okay, that doesn't surprise me. Councillor Fraz?
Not so much a question, but just after going through this main package, I'd like to make a motion on one of the items here to remove them from.
Go ahead.
I'd like to make a motion that we remove the Prospero mobile building inspection software from the spending package.
Okay. Any seconders on that? The very, very first item, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
It is, yeah.
Sure, you wish. Go ahead.
Second for discussion.
That's it. Okay, we got you. Councillor Fraz, comments?
The comments are just that I think as we go through this, we're going to be looking to find our dollars that we can make savings on. And I think this one is one of the low hanging fruit as far as it's not a, it is just more of an efficiency piece that we're able to still operate just in a different manner right now. So I don't think it's a necessity with the uncertainty of how expensive life is going to be in the next year and down the line. I think before we take a whole package and then start whittling away, there's some that we should start to take a look at immediately. And I think that one's a good start, along with the other one that we went for with the community park user analysis. To me, these seem like the easy decision ones before we start getting into the much harder ones.
Councillor Chandler?
Thank you, Your Worship. And just to the comments on Councillor Fraz there, I think that's, that's valid for sure. I don't think I want to remove it today. I wouldn't vote to remove it specifically today, but I'd like to, earmark it as one of the things that I think I would definitely also look at as a savings. I know that the technology and things of this nature is really helpful to the staff, and there's a lot of things that we're bringing forward. With the with the assets, software and so on, and all those things. So I think, there is some things that are maybe gonna have to suffer to make sure that we hit that right number for tax this year. So I wouldn't support voting against it right now, but I would definitely want to, put it on the table for one of the items that I'd like to see potentially removed as well. Thank you.
Councillor O'Brien.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just regarding the Prospero mobile building inspection software. I would not support removing this from the budget at this time. I was impressed with the reasons given for why it needs to be brought into play. Part of it makes it less time, time consuming to bring all the information back to the office and so forth. We're already running, our planner is advised us, we're already running short on building inspectors already. And the thing is that if we did not help them actually make their jobs easier, we may be looking at another half-time building inspector or a full-time building inspector. Maybe that's going to cost far more than the $18,000 in capital is required here, even the $1,600 annual cost. So I think that we're saving on that. And the other thing is I feel that we're receiving very excellent reviews from all the construction and development community about how fast and how efficient our planning department is, as well as building inspections. And from various builders have commented to me that they are so happy with Parksville. It's one of the quickest turnarounds that they ever received. So the thing is that I want to continue that pattern because as the mayor's mentioned anyways, we have certainly been discovered and we just started the amount of buildings coming out of the ground. It's huge what's coming up. So I want to really give all our building inspectors all the tools that they can to make their job a little more easier to stay as efficient and as well respected as they are. So I would vote to leave this in place.
Any other comments? Councillor Frez?
Thank you. I'll just say that I think it's because of that, like it's such an area that's doing so well right now. I don't think there's much room to gain. I think the efficiency we're going to get is just going to put us back kind of in the same cost savings. It's not that we're looking at getting a new employee in that area right now. I don't see it being as a need that we have it more as a nicety type of a thing. And I think we're going to find ourselves quickly in a position where we're going to be having to really look at the needs of our community here too, because I think it's alarming looking at how much costs are going up all around the board. So again, if these are hard decisions to make, I think we're gonna find ourselves in a very tough position next year.
I'm going to go back to my initial comments earlier is that I want to see what it all says before we start deciding whether it's $18,000 here or $20,000 there or $50,000 somewhere else. I know we have to make some cuts in this budget. There's no doubt about that. But until we know what we're dealing with, maybe $12,000 or $18,000 isn't that significant. Maybe it's going to make the difference between 5% and 5.5%. I don't know what I don't know right now. So in my mind, I want to see the numbers put down on paper, and then we start to really sharpen the pencil and go at it. And I look at it, and there's a huge amount of money in the fire department. Do we need to be doing all that right now, or can we be pushing some of that off? In the operations, should we be looking at spending some of the spending packages there? Let's wait and see what it's going to cost us as an overall budget. We come in and the whole thing comes in at a 3% tax increase. Maybe we say, hey, let's go with it all. But maybe not. Maybe if we're at 5%, we're going to say, no, we got to take $100,000 or $200,000 or $300,000 off this budget, and that's going to be when it gets down to the nitty gritty of, is this worth $18,000 to our staff, and what's it going to do? And then we can have those discussions. And I'm actually looking forward to hearing what everybody's opinions are on it. But before we go right down to it, I'm okay to leave it sit till the next round. I'm with Councillor Chandler on that. I'm okay to leave it sit. But if I'm looking at it, it's certainly up there at the top of the easy pickings one by comparison. So that's where I'm standing. Any other comments? Yep, go ahead, please.
Last comment I'll just leave that with is I really think that hard decisions delayed are hard decisions multiplied.
I like that one. You're absolutely right. It's not easy, but uninformed decisions at this point in time is what I'm looking for, Councilor Franz. I'm looking at it and I'm saying, I don't know what the numbers look like until they're all put together. And I'm hoping when we see the next go around, we're going to get a closer view of what this budget really amounts to. It's scaring the bejesus out of me, quite frankly, at this point in time. And if that's the case, there's going to be a lot of really hard decisions made. And then, so until we get to that spot, and I can comfortably look anybody in the eye and say, we had to cut everything out that we cut out in order to make ends meet. It's just like your home budget. At some point in time, you got to make your decisions. So not saying I don't agree that it shouldn't be gone. I'm just saying I want to wait until we get to the next one. The other one was the first one we took out. That to me was a straightforward one. But anyways, I'll go for that. I'll call the question. All those in favor of removal? Against? Wish there was a third one saying defer, but, because I think it's something that we do have to look at again. All right. Anything else? There's no comments. We have a special closed door meeting that so I need a mover and a seconder to move into a closed. Councillor Wilson and seconded by Councillor Chandler. All those in favor? Okay, it shouldn't be too long at all, he says. Oh, no, we can have 5. All right.